Hello and welcome to Proto-Germanic Revivalistics. Today I'm going to share some thoughts on the overarching topic of this channel, that is, to what extent it is possible to bring a reconstructed language stage back to life. While there are subtitles, I don't think I'll be adding any slides on screen this time, so if you're listening while being out for a run or driving to work, the only thing you'll be missing out on is some of the usual background art. If we begin considering the desire to revive a long since dead language, then this seems quite often to be accompanied by a romantic and arcane shroud, with dreams of a golden age and a mysterious shimmer. And thinking about it, even a conlang sounds more interesting just by alluding to its fictitious old age, calling it old this or ancient that. This doesn't have to be negative. An innocently mystical conception of ancient languages might be a catalyst for a language interest that can last a lifetime, and it can lend the needed motivation to begin immersing oneself in extracurricular or academic studies. But strong emotional associations that spring from an unfamiliarity with how languages work and change over time can, if they persist, also become a hindrance. This becomes most apparent should anyone harbor a dim notion of the necessity of authenticity. But the true and authentic language is an illusion, and a too avid pursuit of it can get in the way of one's opportunities to develop a deeper appreciation and understanding of the subject. Unless this can be overcome, it can seriously hamper any attempts to revive a language. Regarding Proto-Germanic, this of course isn't of much importance outside of our personal sphere. But when it comes to revitalizing moribund or critically endangered languages, or reviving languages that relatively recently have been subject to linguicide, it can, to everyone's loss, effectively sabotage more skilled and insightful efforts that others might be putting in. In either case, reviving a language in the common sense of the word is what I believe is haunting in the background here. This is the way we meet it in works of fiction and movies, and which is something that admittedly is very stimulating to the imagination. For the purpose of reenactment and similar, credible and faithful imitation of a lost language or language stage, given the prerequisite expertise and sufficient scope of the corpus, is quite possible, but it's also a rare skill. As much as I would like to be able to say the opposite, reviving a language by just picking up and continuing from where it left off when it fell into oblivion is however not possible. There is much more going on in a living language than what we most of the time are aware of. Perhaps trivially, a word can mean one thing in a certain context and something completely else in another. Taken literally, a colloquialism or fixed expression can be nonsensical, as for example, what's up? It's the opposite of down, is it not? And we don't talk the same way with the love of our life as we do with elders or children, and not the same way by the dinner table as we do in class or at work. Giving orders in the military is very different from teaching in elementary school or trying to advise a friend or an obstinate co-worker. Writing a recipe is quite different from writing a work of fiction, an argumentative essay, or a poem praising the beauty of nature. And we use posture, facial expressions, intonation, and short little words in a myriad ways to give a certain nuance to what we want to say. If someone asks us what one of those little words mean, chances are we won't have an answer. Just how difficult it can be to define them shows from that just finding an insightful analysis of any one of them in a certain language can be a challenge. Every word you use has a certain connotation, which can vary depending on the circumstances. It can be polite, or rude, or vulgar, or raunchy, or condescending, or considerate, or humble, or maybe flirtatious. Or it can carry a cultural or historical baggage which makes it difficult to use in a socially acceptable way. And a certain word may be deeply entrenched in a spiritual or religious view of the world that can be very difficult, or maybe even impossible, to appreciate to its full extent for someone grown up in a very different culture, be it somewhere else in the world today or in an age a very long time ago. When a language becomes forgotten, a lot of these things and a whole lot more cultural knowledge that we haven't even begun to mention here is lost forever. Though even if a relatively good-sized chunk of a language has been thoroughly documented and analyzed before it was lost, chances are that a lot of it will still get lost in revival, as it's likely going to be just too much to keep in mind or too alien to handle for anyone but the specialist. And becoming such a specialist, and I don't count myself as one, requires much more effort and time than most of us are able or willing to put into it. The less you have recorded of a language that is no longer spoken, the bigger the gaps will be. And whatever can be said about the language is also going to depend both on the amount and the quality of the research that's been done on it. Some of it is going to be excellent, while some of it is going to be appallingly bad. The most abysmal work can at times fly under the radar and pass a review of even the cream of the crop of the world's linguists. But all that said about the difficulties, whether or not any language revival efforts are going to take off, will boil down to how motivated those who want to use the language are. If one is motivated enough, one will learn and become informed of the nature of the task, and any unreasonable expectations that might have been lingering in the beginning will, given time, become dispelled. When having begun to immerse oneself in the study of Proto-Germanic, one will come to realize that knowledge of Proto-Germanic isn't comparable to competence and proficiency in a living language. That is, it makes little sense to ask how, quote-unquote, good someone's Proto-Germanic is. From one point of view, it would be etymologists, that is, the experts who study the origin and evolution of words and their constituents over time, that have the best grasp of Proto-Germanic, even though they might not agree on everything. This, however, doesn't mean that they can converse fluently in it, or spontaneously say good morning, or I love you, or ask how your day at work has been. Conversational proficiency isn't something on the table when you study etymology. It's a completely different skill set. If we turn toward the practicalities, then a revived language will not be a natural offspring to its source. Whether we like it or not, it will become a hybrid, and this entails that corners must be cut and gaps in knowledge must be filled to solve the communicative difficulties one will be facing. That patching will likely always be influenced subconsciously by our native language, but it can also be done consciously by choosing which languages to do so with. For revived Proto-Germanic, we have all the attested Old Germanic languages here to botanize among. But if we can't find what we need in the grammars, dictionaries, and texts of these that we have access to in person, we can also look at other conservative or archaic languages such as, for example, Lithuanian and Sanskrit. Lithuanian has the clear advantage for revived Proto-Germanic in that it is still very much spoken in all its complexity. But exactly what to fill in any gaps with and how to cut any corners are in the end discretionary decisions. That is, it's up to you to decide how you want to revive Proto-Germanic. There are many possible combinations of different decisions one can make here, many of which will solve problems in different but likely equally viable ways, albeit giving the end result a somewhat different flavor. Something which can have a tangible impact on the flavor is also how early or how late reconstructions of Proto-Germanic you prefer to use. My choices here will be different from those of others you might encounter, and they might be different from the ones you will decide to make. I cannot impose my preferences on you any more than you can impose yours on me. But when it comes to reviving Proto-Germanic, we need to remind ourselves of that absolutely nothing of import hinges upon the decisions we make. We engage in this work simply because we have a desire to do so and feel that it in some way enriches our experiences and existence. What we can aim for is a constructive and fruitful exchange of ideas that helps each of us to edge closer to our goal, which is to express ourselves in a language that holds a special place for us. In this context, we might also want to think of idiolects and dialects. While not entirely comparable, it's not entirely different either from the fact that each of us has a personal idiolect, which in turn might have several registers, which in turn exists in the context of dialect, which in turn can be a part of a dialect continuum, and so on and so forth. In consonance with that, a revived language will be a multi-parental hybrid, or as the linguist Gilad Zuckerman so nicely put it, both a phoenix and a cuckoo. We also need to keep in mind that revived Proto-Germanic isn't exactly going to be Proto-Germanic. Proto-Germanic can be an object of scientific inquiry, but as a living language, the long stage in the history of the Germanic languages which we call Proto-Germanic is irretrievably gone, and saying that our revived language is Proto-Germanic would be misleading. In private, among my friends and acquaintances that share both my interest and perspective on revived Proto-Germanic, I use another name for this language. But for simplicity's sake and to avoid confusion, I will on this channel still say that we are experimenting with Proto-Germanic, somewhat misleading as though it may be. But if you're still with me, please keep the aforementioned in the back of your head as we proceed from here. Now I'll try to put into words what I really want to convey to you in this video. Natural, living and spoken languages exhibit order and structure in their sometimes mind-boggling grammatical complexity, and that structure is necessary for us to understand each other. But languages also exhibit what we can think of as a sort of chaos in their never-ending and unpredictable diachronic transformation across the eons and incalculable synchronic variation between individuals. When one realizes and accepts the inevitability of this state of flux, I believe a certain sense of serenity can be found, as one cannot avoid to simultaneously appreciate both order and chaos within the languages of the world. It seems unreasonable, at least to me, to assume that the individual and dialectal diversity that we can today observe within a language didn't also hold valid for Proto-Germanic as one spoken. As we try to make something out of revived Proto-Germanic today, I believe we would be enchaining ourselves to a dream or a fantasy should we try to suffocate our individual expressions of this diversity. So I would want to encourage us to value the order and structure that we can recover, but also to be conscious of that it, you and me are but tiny motes of dust thrown around and existing in an eternal sea of chaos, and try to embrace, or at least be indifferent to the variation that it brings with it. It seems highly unlikely that some variety of revived Proto-Germanic would last beyond its inception, and I'm not sure if it would serve us well to dwell too much upon that. I rather want to think of the language akin to an overlooked and forgotten garden. It will become what it will, when and how it is tended to by us who feel the need to cultivate it. There is no urgency. When our incarnations are gone, the call of the great void will be felt in someone else, be it in a year, a decade, or centuries away. And if not here, then somewhere else in some other time. The moat will swirl, flung around by the waves and currents of a dark and endless sea, and there is no urgency. Until next time, be well.